Dan and I argued in a recent article is that we should encourage Mahmoud Abbas to hold elections. If elections were held today, what would the outcome be?
Well, elections are not going to be held today under the current conditions, but elections were supposed to take place on the 22nd, 2 days from now, of May. And had those elections taken place, let's for a minute omit this war. Had elections taken place, Hamas about a third of the popular vote, meaning it would have been able to have a third of the seats in the Palestinian parliament. Fatah and Fatah defectors would probably have gained up to 50% of the seats, and the rest would have gone to third parties and the left. This is a victory for Fatah, one would think, but Abbas would have lost, and Fatah, official Fatah, Abbas's Fatah, would have lost the dominance in the political system, as he would have had to grapple with the defectors and concede to defectors whom he disliked very much. And now that the war had taken place, however, Hamas's popularity at this juncture is very high. No elections are going to take place under current conditions. After each war and during each war, we have seen a spike in support for Hamas that within 2 to 3 months have basically leveled off. And we went back to where we were before, perhaps with Hamas slightly in a better position than before.
Thank you. Tzipi, let me ask you the same question. What does winning mean with respect to this particular round for Israel? How would the current government, or how would you define winning? Tzipi, I think you need to unmute. Unmute. Well, she can't hear me.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
There you go.
I want to say I listened to the discussion before, and I feel sorry because we enter again and again to do this kind of a blame game between Israel and the Palestinians. And I believe that this doesn't, because as we said about the American society that is split, there's a split in Israel, and I think that there's a split also on the Palestinian side. And the choice is not between Israel and the Palestinians, but the real question is how moderates or pragmatics on both sides, and is there any opportunity for pragmatics on both sides to reach something that would lead to a deal and peace in the future, even if peace is not just around the corner for now. So when you ask me about the military operation, yes, deterrence or agreement and affecting the infrastructure of terror, this is one thing, but this doesn't give an answer in the long run. And in the long run, and I want to put some facts on the table, because when I'm speaking about one state, I do not refer to Gaza, because Israel left Gaza Strip. There are no Israel in Gaza. We dismantled the settlements, pull out our forces, and unfortunately, in the elections, and because Abu Mazen wanted to convince the Americans to let Hamas participate in election, by the way, no armed militia in the world, well, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, same problem, can participate in democratic election without accepting rules of law and so on. But this is something that already happened. So yes, there are, Israel was established in accordance also to the UN decision as the nation state of the Jewish people with equal rights to all its citizens. Are there extremists also in Israel? Yes, but this is an internal debate within Israel, and the real question, how can we move forward toward an understanding, not with Hamas, not only because Hamas is a terrorist organization, because Hamas, since 2006, is not willing to accept the right of Israel to exist, to accept or to abide to Oslo Agreement and to renounce violence and terrorism. And therefore, to put together all the Palestinians in one, one basket, and to put all the Israelis and so on, this would lead to another blame game and blame game. And unfortunately, 2014, Abu Mazen, well, he didn't refuse, but he didn't say yes to an American paper to negotiate on the basis of 67 line. Why am I saying this? Because there are two options from now, and I agree that, well, the focus of Biden administration is not on the region, but there is no status quo, so things are happening. So when I'm speaking about putting again the two states for the GPS, because unfortunately, also in Israel and with Trump administration, the GPS turned into annexation, something that would lead us to the point of no return. And therefore, by taking this as a long run, in long terms, as the GPS, this is important. When you know that this is where you are heading, then you can take steps toward this and avoid steps that would be obstacles on the way. And this is something, it's not dramatic, but it would prevent us from turning or crossing the point of no return. So this is the situation now. So we can, and trust me, there's a list of how can I blame the Palestinians, why they can blame Israel. Well, this is not the kind of debate that we need. And therefore, I'm speaking about facts and yet also some aspiration and vision that serves the interest of Israel and the Palestinians, those who wants to live in peace with the other. And I think that in order to achieve peace, there's a need just for 2 out of 3. I'm speaking about the US, Israel, and the Palestinians. If we have Israeli and Palestinian leadership who's willing to make an agreement, there is no need for the US. If the US and one of the sides can push forward toward this, that's fine. Unfortunately, now in a situation in which we are facing a kind of a stalemate if nothing happens, and the worst case scenario is deterioration. And the real question, how to turn this ship again toward the vision of peace.
Right. Well, let me understand. Your notion of redefining the GPS, and correct me if I'm not accurately summarizing your view, is that you hold out the vision, the political horizon of perhaps the least bad solution to the conflict. To Marwan's point, a two-state solution, and you pursue meaningful steps in order to create a different environment between Israelis and Palestinians that would govern each of their behavior, so that at some point you could have a serious negotiation on the core issues. Is that what you have in mind?
Yes, I will take exactly the ways of the GPS example, okay? When I enter my car, I put a GPS. Now we have problems on the way. We have traffic jams.
Right.
Can we meet our partner for peace in a station? I'm not sure that there is a partner now. But instead of taking completely different direction, like annexation or something else, something that I believe is against my vision, I can stop for a while, but I would not put obstacles on my way. So I will try and find other roads to reach the same destination, or maybe it will take more time. But the vision is important. It's not just a vague idea. According to this vision, you portray also the tactic, not only the strategy, and your policy. And this is needed.
Right. Right. I understand. That would require, of course, real leaders on both sides to take the kinds of steps, even on an interim basis, that would fundamentally change the environment. Now, Marwan, I think I know your answer on this, but you've basically come to the conclusion that the notion of two states is a thing of the past, correct? And nothing there's no way to avoid the decree. That is to say, even if you had leaders that would emerge on both sides, willing to be serious and to invest, and a third party, let's just say the United States for the sake of argument, willing to do serious diplomacy, that it's just too late. Marone Benvenisti, who was arguing in the 80s that it's 5 minutes to midnight. You argue for the two states it's past midnight, correct?
Correct, Aaron. Let me not quote myself, Aaron. Let me quote Secretary of State John Kerry. Okay, in 2014, with the latest round of negotiations between Israel and Palestinians, John Kerry told Congress then that the window on a two-state solution is 1 to 1.5 years. That was 7 years ago. So don't trust me. Trust your own leader. These are the facts. The Israeli leadership, in my view, is not interested neither in a two-state solution nor in ending the occupation. The Palestinian leadership has no legitimacy among its own people, and the status quo is not frozen. And the United States is not prepared at any time to do serious diplomacy in order to affect a two-state solution. So if we are waiting for 5 or 10 years down the road, when the stars are aligned such that we have Israeli and Palestinian leaderships that are interested and willing, and such that we have an engaged US administration, that might result in a two-state solution if the status quo is frozen.
Yes.
But the status quo is not frozen. So, when the Palestinians signed Oslo, there were 250,000 settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Today, there are 700,000 settlers. In 5 or 10 years, I don't even know what the number will be. So we are really following a mirage. And I'm sorry to say this. I'm a two-stater. But I have to be, I have to believe the facts. And the facts tell me that separation of the two communities is becoming impossible.
I would argue it's a political, psychological, and geographic imperative, but I agree with you. I don't quite see the road there. But Dan Kurtzer, can you reconcile any of this?
Well, the reality is the core issue, as you yourself just said, Aaron, a few minutes ago, is leadership. And we may have it in places like Jordan or outside the region, but we don't have it among the two protagonists. The Prime Minister of Israel, who may remain the Prime Minister of Israel, is not interested in a two-state solution. He's building a coalition of the extreme right and wants to remain in power. The president of the Palestinian Authority is in, the 16th year of a 4-year term. Hamas, the other players, certainly are not interested in a two-state solution. So you don't have leadership among the two protagonists that you would require. On the other hand, where I disagree fundamentally with Marwan is it's very easy, in a way, to head off in a different direction. I mean, the annexationists in the Biden administration thought that that was a great idea. Just let Israel do what it wants to do and legalize it. There are some people now, and Marwan has written a paper on this, who believe that reality on the ground should become a formal legal form of government. And the problem is that anybody who has analyzed alternatives to the two-state solution knows that none of them works. They're all very easy to grab onto. None of them works for a variety of reasons. Annexation won't work. One state won't work. Confederation as a first step doesn't work. You end up with partition. You end up with two states. You end up with a formal separation, no matter how many times you analyze this or try to come up with an alternative. And that gets us back to leadership. Until the people of Israel decide that they've had enough of this, until the people in Palestine decide they have had enough of it, and they want a leader who will not refuse to respond to a president of the United States who puts out a plan in 2014, or a prime minister of Israel who puts out a plan in 2008, we're not going to get anywhere. But that doesn't mean that we should glom onto something that frankly will not work.
Mm. I mean, Ben, and I am biased here, even though I realize that we're caught between a two-state solution that's impossible to implement now on one hand, and I would argue, I know Marwan and I don't agree, in my view, too important to abandon, as Tzipi would say, as a meaningful horizon. And why is that? It's because of what Ben Franklin said. Proximity breeds contempt. And Franklin added children. And Israelis and Palestinians have a proximity problem. I don't know how to address that. And I don't see any model in this region where two ethnic, nationalist, religious, national movements can find a way to house their ambitions and irredenta in one big house. Khalil, let me ask you, final question. And again, I don't want to sound like the poster child for the two-state solution, because I think the odds of achieving one right now are worse than slim to none. But what does your polling suggest on this in a non-crisis period? Is there any credibility left among Palestinians for this solution?
If you ask Palestinian youth, the answer is yes. What Marwan is proposing is the way to go. Their support for a two-state solution has declined significantly. There's more support among the youth, those between the ages of 18 and 29, for the one-state solution than there is for the two-state solution. This, however, is not the overall picture. The overall picture is mixed. The support for the one-state solution is getting very close to the support for the two-state solution, but a plurality is still in favor of a one-state solution. I agree with you on the horizon for a two-state solution, but I agree with Marwan that the future, the default, as we fail to deliver a two-state solution as the means of ending the Israeli occupation, the default solution is a one-state reality that we cannot escape. So if you think that a two-state solution is not doable today because of leadership, you have to come to the conclusion that the future is for a one-state outcome. Do not call it a solution, but it is an outcome that we have to live with.
Khalil, thank you. Would anyone like to offer a final comment? We've come to the end of the hour, but I'll offer anyone who wants to make a brief final observation. Marwan, I think, would you?
Sure. Let me just say this. Let's not fight over whether it is a one-state solution or a two-state solution. Let's focus on rights. Okay, let's make rights the center argument for people where both Palestinians and Israelis enjoy equal rights. But to keep talking about the shape of a solution and ignore the rights of people, I think is not sustainable.
Marwan, thank you. And I want to thank all of you, Dan, Khalil, Tzipi, and Marwan. Anytime I want to depress myself, I will have this session on YouTube, and I may come back to it every now and then just to remind myself of how difficult a problem this is going to be. But the fact that the four of you are here, lending your experience, your authority, your expertise, and in essence, you all, I think, really want the same thing. And you all have tremendous honesty and clarity and great integrity. So again, let me thank you all for participating. And I will sign off with my one piece of advice that has now become my new mantra. Think positive, but test negative. Until the next Carnegie Connects, wishing you all the very best.